Hi friends, Lorelei Black here from Blade Broom, and this week we are going to be talking about how to communicate with the spirits that you work with. Whether those are spirits with whom you're very, very close, like your familiar or familiars, or whether they are spirits that you are working with at a little bit more of a distance. How can you actually learn a little bit more about what it is that they're trying to communicate with you, and how can you clearly convey your messages to them? So this seems like a really great time to jump in and just say that I am accepting through my small publishing house, and I mean very small publishing house, submissions to The Witch's Key to Goetic Familiars, which is a compendium guide for craft practitioners who are wanting to, or who are already working with familiars that come out of the 72 spirits of the Legion. If your familiar spirit is one of those 72 Goetic spirits and you have insight, rituals, prayers, chants, other liturgical pieces, just essays that you would like to, or thoughts that you would like to put into essay form, that you would like to share on how to approach and work with either a particular spirit or with these spirits in general, then I would love for you to consider contributing. And you can find that contribution information, that submission information at asteriabooks.com. The link is in my link tree down in the description box below. We are taking submissions through March 31st of 2021. So if you're watching this video at some point in the future, be on the lookout for that book. Okay, so I have worked a lot with my own spirits, obviously, but I've also worked a lot in, for instance, at psychic fairs and at psychic shops and with people online who are being contacted by spirits or in close relationship with spirit or in a close enough relationship with spirit that they're feeling spirits, but they're not necessarily hearing them very clearly, or they're doubting the messages that they're getting, and they're wanting to know how to better sort of feel or understand what's going on with that spirit. As witches, I feel like we've got some really great tools that we can use and some techniques that we can employ in order to be able to do spirit work. So that's what we're really covering today, is those techniques and tips and tricks and that type of thing for how to better work with your spirits, because you can hear them better and understand the messages that they're trying to get to you. So I'll start off too by saying that some folks are just naturally gifted psychics and mediums, and using these particular tips and techniques and tricks isn't probably a strictly accurate word, but using these particular techniques and tools is not really necessary for them because they're already in close communication with the spirit world just naturally. It's just how they're built. And so having to go to sort of a witchcraft method or a sorcery method or even a ceremonial magic method doesn't make sense for them. And so if you find that you're already in that category of person, then things like learning how to shield yourself and learning how to banish and all of that type of thing might also be really foundational pieces that you need to learn. They are for all witches, I will say that. Cleansing and banishing, grounding and centering, which I talk about here and I talk about with my students as aligning the souls. And that's something that we've explored a little bit on this channel already. Those are like foundational pieces to this work. You need to be doing those things on a regular basis and getting really familiar with the how-tos of those things. either before you really jump into spirit work, or if spirit work is upon you and there's no avoiding it, as sort of foundational pieces to help you deal with what's happening, just so that you have a way to control the flow, and also to get away from or to cut off communication with any kind of spirit that might be bothering you. Because in that sense, spirits can be like people. You might not want to communicate with all of them that want to communicate with you. Some of them can be a nuisance. Certainly not all of them. There are many, many wonderful people out there with whom you can have fulfilling, collaborative, supportive relationships. And then there are people that you're like, oh no, stay the hell away from me. and it's like that with spirits. So, you know, you want to be able to keep those ones at arm's length or further. So really, we'll talk about banishing and all that kind of stuff, and cleansing, and those are all topics for other videos. We can't get into all of that today. What we're talking about today is just that communication piece. So I've got to assume that you know a little bit about banishing for today, a little bit about cleansing, and a little bit about grounding and centering for today. And we're just going to zero in on how to communicate once you've already worked on that sort of summoning or evoking technique to be able to get a spirit into close contact with you. Okay, so the first thing to address really is your space and where you're doing this work at. So conventional thought or conventional wisdom says that you always have to engage in spirit contact, spirit work within sacred space. So that's usually going to be at least a circle, but usually a circle and a triangle. The circle is where the operator, the witch or the magician, stands and is working and moving, and then the triangle is where the spirit is called and would be once they arrive. And that's where they stay once they arrive. Now, again, conventional wisdom says that the circle that you create is a circular ring, a magic ring on the ground, and that is protecting you from negative, evil influences, that nothing that you don't invite specifically can enter, and that it is for holding all the energy in that you create. And that the triangle is like almost like a little prison for the spirit, where you are evoking them into that triangle, and they are compelled to stay there until you release them, and to do whatever you say, especially if you're threatening them with things. You know, and I'm holding up, this is me pretending to hold up a metal disc of some sort with their name inscribed on it and a wand, you know, threatening them. Because this is the classical way to control spirits. But I have discovered for myself that this feels very unethical. This is not the spirit relationship that I want to have, and I don't find it necessary or needful. Now, there are plenty of people that will tell you that that's the only way that you can go, that that's what you must do in order to protect yourself. And I just don't think that's true. If there is ever a spirit that you feel like you need to threaten in order to get them to work with you, just don't work with that spirit. There are plenty of others to choose from, probably ones that do exactly what that one does, but are nicer and more cooperative and are interested in helping you out. The other thing is that witches, especially traditional witches, really have a different view on what a circle is anyway. We don't tend to lay or cast a magic circle with the same thought process that other types of magical operators or sorceress operators do necessarily. We don't tend to think of it in the same terms precisely that they do. There's some overlap in thought there, and certainly That might be exactly where you're coming from, that the circle is a protective sphere or bubble. And I think it is helpful to think of the circle as a sphere. It is a three-dimensional space. It is not just a flat ring on the ground. It exists, and maybe even 3 dimensions is a wrong way to think about it. It might be more dimensions than that. Um, but certainly it surrounds us. It encases us as we're working. And the same is true of the triangle. It is a 3-dimensional, at least, space, right, into which the spirit can be manifested. But instead of thinking of the circle as a boundary ring that holds things in and keeps things out, traditional witches tend to think of the compass as like a target that they're drawing on the ground, an energetic target where we're getting the attention of the powers and saying, hey, focus here. This is where I'm doing the work. This is the crossroads. This is the liminal space. Even if I had to like make that liminal space, because I was not standing at a crossroads. I was not standing on the river bank. I'm not at the seashore. I'm not in a cave mouth. I'm not in a physically liminal space. Now I'm in an energetically liminal one. So it tends to be for that, again, drawing the attention of the powers and also of intensifying or magnifying energy. So we do raise energy within that, and it becomes sort of a cauldron or a container, a vessel for that energy, in order to allow us to direct it somewhere when that is the work that we're doing. Now, as far as that triangle, it may be a triangle on the ground for you. You know, that may be what you're having to do. And the same thing with your compass. It may be a circular shape on the ground, but again, they're operating in 3-dimensional space or multi-dimensional space. And I think that that's really, again, since we're thinking about how they're liminal spaces, we're creating them between the worlds. They are multi-dimensional spaces. That triangle isn't for containment of a spirit that you're trapping into this energetic construct. That pyramid is and always has been a really powerful place of manifestation. You'll see in a lot of cross-cultural, religious and ceremonial, magical practices and that type of thing, pyramids being used in order to sort of crystallize and manifest and bring the ethereal into flesh, into the incarnate world, to be able to do that with energy, to bring it from something really insubstantial and make it substantial, to make it something that we can interact with, which is what you're trying to do. So, and I'm going to give you a couple of symbols to show you how you might set up your sphere and pyramid, or your circle and triangle. So you might have that triangle or that pyramid outside of your circle or sphere, or you might have it inside. And for me, I go with intuition on this. I go with how familiar I am with the spirit that I'm working with on this. I go with, there are a number of factors that might play into how I'm deciding whether or not I'm going to invite that spirit in a lot closer or a little bit further away. But you, as the operator of the working, are going to be inside the circle, and the spirit is going to be inside the triangle or pyramid, not because you're trying to keep them really separate from you, and bind them there, but because you're trying to give them a place where they can be as present in this physical world as possible, so that their communication and their messages are clearer. And really, the tool that you're going to be using for that communication should be inside that triangle, which means that your hands may be coming inside that triangle so that you can interact with the tool. So if you've got a talking board in there, for instance, or your pendulum and pendulum mat is in there, then probably your hands are also going to be in there too. So it's not like this hot zone that you can't touch, right? Let's just take a small break and jump over to Reminder Lorelei. Hi friends, I am just jumping in here really fast because I wanted to say hi and welcome to friends both old and new. Thank you so much for joining us for this particular video and just to the channel in general. I'm so excited about the growth that we're having. Thank you so much for being a part of that. And also, I have a couple of really quick announcements that I want to get out there. One is that the channel now has its very own Patreon page, so check that out. It is patreon.com/bladeandbroom, super easy to find, and super easy to help support us in any way that you are able if you are interested. Another really quick thing is that the Red Thread Academy of Traditional American Folkloric Witchcraft is finally available with its first full course, which is like a whole year of study, and it's a way for you to study with me directly, and I mean pretty directly. So you can just buy the book if you're interested and just do it on your own. I'm cool with that, but you can also, if you would like, purchase the book and then join the Facebook group that I have set up for that and interact with other people who are also taking the course, and that is available in my Etsy shop, which is linked down in the description box below. So lots of options. There are other things that I'm getting up to down in my link tree, including writing for OOAK publication every month. It is a fantastic deal, $3 a month, gives you access to lots and lots of witchy and pagan lifestyle articles and all kinds of goodness. And of course, I'm writing about traditional witchcraft, so it's a good time. And there's more, but I'll stop there now and just say, like, subscribe, do all those things, share. That all helps out the channel and helps me get even better stuff out to you and be able to interact in lots of different ways. So, you know, like, ding the bell, do all those things. And back to the content. Thanks, Reminder Lorelei. Now, where were we? Oh, yeah. So then one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, how does the communication with a spirit happen? How do I know that I'm actually getting communicated with? Does it only ever happen in ritual? Is that the only place that that can happen or not? And the answer to that is no, it does not only have to happen in ritual. It can happen in waking states, such as when you're in ritual and specifically trying to communicate with a spirit. And usually in those states, you're going to be experiencing something like one of the clairs, clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentience. So clear hearing, clear seeing, clear knowing, where you just sort of like, information just sort of like pops into your head. And you may very likely be using a tool in order to gain that insight. Or it can also happen in the dreaming state. So maybe you have undergone dream incubation and are using that as a tool to be able to communicate with spirits while you're asleep. And there is a lot of folkloric evidence to suggest that that this is a very common way that we interact with spirits, that spirits show up to us and interact with us. Many of us, not all of us, so don't feel left out if that's not a thing that's happening for you, but that they come to us in dreams. Sometimes as people that we know, but we know that they're not, that maybe they're like wearing the skin of the person that we know. And sometimes as somebody totally different or unfamiliar or unusual, and there are sometimes symbols around them that sort of key our brains into recognizing them as being a spirit or being from the spirit realms. And then it can also happen in what I would call twilight states. And that's not my term, right? This idea of twilight sleep has been around for a very long time, and it's the concept of being in between waking and sleeping. So it certainly happens as we're falling asleep. It also happens when we're under the influence of certain kinds of anesthesia or entheogens, which are substances that we take in order to alter our consciousness, often for trance work, spirit work, journeying, that type of thing. It can also happen when you're experiencing trauma and extreme pain. You can go into sort of a twilight sleep or a twilight state where you're between this world and the next world, where your consciousness sort of leaves and hangs around, and you're open to those messages and those visions. So as you can see, since spirit communication can happen when you're awake, when you're asleep, or when you're somewhere in between, you might not necessarily be in ritual space during those times, during some of those times. So there are lots of options, I guess. There's a lot of ways that this can happen. Certainly you can instigate that spirit contact from within ritual space, from within the circle and triangle, and then it may actually manifest itself later, especially if that's something that you've opened yourself up to. Okay, so let's think about some of the tools and specific techniques that you can use to actually get into that spirit communication. And the ones that I'm going to share are a few that I have found not just personally really useful, but also ones that have a long history of being useful for lots of folks, and you even see in classical grimoires these being referenced. So the very first that I feel like must get mentioned is a scrying mirror, or other types of scrying, like water scrying, smoke scrying, that type of thing. But I think the oldest really probably is water scrying, especially into like a dark bowl or maybe a cauldron of water, or using a dark mirror, or what some folks would call a keek stain, or a keek stone, a seeing stone. So I won't go into all of the details on how to scry, because we've talked about that before, and we can talk about it some more, but not in this video if if that's needed. But you would put your scrying tool inside of that pyramid, inside of that triangle, and that might mean for you placing your mirror upright so that you can see it, maybe on a frame holder or a book holder or something that's going to keep it standing up, and then placing ribbon or twigs, you know, maybe 3 twigs that are of an equal length around it to enclose it, or putting a cauldron of water there in the same place inside the triangle, and then putting a candle flame either behind you and out of sight, maybe in the far corner of the room, so that you're not going to knock it over, and so that it's also not immediately within your periphery. Or if you've got the mirror standing up and it's large enough and you have no worries that it's going to get knocked over, you could put it behind that mirror or behind that seeing stone. But you wouldn't want any other light in the room for being able to do this. And it's a very powerful and very old method of spirit communication. It's very visual, although some people do get auditory messages with this as well. It tends to be a very visual method of spirit communication. So you'll tend to see symbols, you'll tend to see figures, you'll tend to see faces, and it may take you a minute, and by a minute I mean like 10 to 15, to get into that space and to really start to see, but it is very effective, and you'll get there. Another one that that I find to be very effective and that lots of people find to be very effective, so effective that there's so much lore about how scary it is the talking board, or the Ouija board. Now, Ouija is a specific brand or a specific style of board that is now trademarked by Parker Brothers, I think. The talking board has a long history and is very useful. And honestly, the talking board is no more dangerous than any other type of spirit communication, because that's what you're using it for, and B, really than any other form of communication if you use them irresponsibly and talk to just anybody that calls you on the phone, or anybody that sends you messages in your inbox on any social media. If you just start having conversations with those people, just the randos, then, you know, you're going to have issues. And it's the same thing with any of these. You know, you have to do a little bit of asking questions and making sure that you're talking to somebody that you want to be talking to and listening to your intuition. If you find that the sensation of using a talking board, and I'm using like I'm doing it. If you find that the sensation of using a talking board doesn't work out so well for you if you're by yourself, and there are a lot of people that don't like using it solo because the energy doesn't flow quite as well for them if they're by themselves, then you might try using a pendulum and a pendulum mat or pendulum board. And again, we've chatted about this on another video, but the simplest version of that is just to, on a piece of paper or on a piece of wood, write all of the letters of the alphabet in a semicircle, and then allow the pendulum to swing in straight lines to indicate each successive letter of the words or phrases that it's trying to communicate. There might be a lot of interpretation and trying to like sound things out as far as what that is, because in my experience, spirits, especially when you're first developing a relationship with them, the connection isn't always really strong, and so the spelling is not always that strong. But it often gets better the stronger your relationship gets, the more invested they are in helping you. I've mentioned dream incubation already earlier in this video, and I would say that that's another excellent way to achieve spirit communication, is intentionally going about having spirit contact dreams. So, and again, that's a tried and true and old method. And there are a lot of different ways to do that, but the briefest explanation is that you would set the intention of it before going to sleep, especially when you're in that twilight stage between sleeping and waking. You might use a word of power in order to induce this, or a phrase that you have developed in order to achieve this. Or you might have a small ritual that you've developed for yourself in bed, you know, a mental ritual that you go through in your mind in order to enter that style of dream state. And this is a more complicated method to be able to share here, so we should probably dedicate a video to that. But it is definitely effective. So another method of spirit communication that I really like and that has a long history is that of spirit writing. There are a lot of variations of spirit writing all over the world and in lots of different cultures and in different time periods. And I find that what I notice is that it looks a little bit different from culture to culture and also from practitioner to practitioner. So the thing that I'm recommending is not necessarily what is called automatic writing, which by strictest definition is a thing where like you're not looking, but your hand is moving and is writing theoretically words, but you are not consciously trying to make them write words. It's just spilling out of you because the spirit is moving you. It's also not Himmelsbrief, which is something very much from the American folkloric tradition, coming from Pennsylvania Dutch or Pennsylvania Deutsch, because Himmelsbrief is more about a letter of protection, a heavenly letter of protection. It actually means letter from heaven or heaven's letter. And it's supposed to be a direct message from God or from the angels or from ancestors who have passed on and are in heaven, and who are offering either inspiration or most frequently protection. And usually I keep like pointing at the wall or like angling toward the wall, because generally this type of letter is talismanic in nature, and you would a braucherei or a hexerei, which is somebody who is a practitioner steeped in the folk magic of that community, would handwrite this as it was received to them, and you would then place it on your wall as a talisman, essentially, to protect the home or the barn or the business. So that's a little bit of a different thing. The idea of a message from the other world is embedded in it, and it's absolutely accurate, but the rest, the execution of it's very different. What I tend to call what I do and what I've known other folks to do that I think is very, very helpful here is a sort of spirit writing that involves using a journaling technique to allow spirit to communicate with you, or a spirit to communicate with you. And this can work from anything from a familiar type spirit all the way to a deity type spirit, you know, one of these big spirits that has sort of a lot of mass to them, a lot of energetic mass to them. But basically what you do is you start by writing some of your own thoughts and your questions down, and then as soon as you start hearing or getting the impression of a message back from them, don't overanalyze it, just start writing the response that you're getting. And typically what happens is the process of handwriting takes enough of your attention from your conscious mind that your subconscious mind or subconscious mind, unconscious, anyway, that a different part of your mind is able to allow those messages to sort of filter down and filter through. And so you're able to hear a voice that is not yours. You're able to hear that spirit talking. For me, that still happens like in this space, right? Like I'm not hearing an external voice out there in the world, as if, you know, the same way that I would if my daughter was sitting in the room talking to me and it's a sound that I feel like my ears are hearing. It's definitely something that like I hear on the inside of my head, but it's one that I feel like is so distinctly different from me that I recognize that as being the particular spirit that I'm talking to. I think it's this sort of experience that leads to what we've talked about before in terms of models of magic, when we talked about why witches need to learn metaphysics, that a lot of practitioners, a lot of magicians and witches and sorcerers have gone, oh, it must all be in my head then. I must be creating it. These are all extensions of myself. This becomes then the psychological model. But for me, as a very spirit model kind of person, and I think most traditional witches can go, no, that's still not me in there. This is just the mechanism by which we hear, by which I hear. And so I find that writing to be a very useful tool. And maybe that makes sense for people who really are writers, especially. Words are extraordinarily important for me in my world. So writing is one of those great tools for me. You may find that scrying, well, let's see, I'll just, whatever method you use, there are a few tips that I would suggest that you embrace along the way, a few attitudes and practices of thought that I think will help. One is to develop trust, and to just offer trust a bit at the beginning, especially. To be able to acknowledge, I hear you, even when at first you're not really sure if you're hearing them or you're hearing yourself. Saying I hear you to spirits allows them and allows you to open up that pathway for communication a little bit more. It works on you in a subconscious way that allows you to be more open to what it is that they're sharing. So sometimes we really have to work on that trust that we're actually getting messages and that it's not just us making shit up. Because there is sometimes that feeling that that's happening. So that acknowledging and accepting is part of building trust. Thank your spirits. So that's another tip. It should be obvious. It shouldn't be something I have to tell you, but at the same time, if nobody's ever pointed that out and you haven't necessarily been approaching your spirit work from a place of reciprocity, now's a good time to start. Thank them with your words and thank them with your deeds. So say thank you very much for this time, this energy, and then do something to give them thanks, like an offering of some sort. Alcohol is great, strong alcohol, particularly, like, I've never met a spirit who didn't like whiskey. I particularly keep a lot of bourbon around. Maybe that's because I live in Kentucky now, or just because I have a taste for the bourbon. But they tend to like that. If you particularly, you yourself, have an objection to alcohol, or you find that one of your spirits does, you know, if they're like, no, not that, don't give me that. There are lots and lots of other options for things that you can give them. And if you're hearing them, they may tell you what it is that they want. Cream, honey, tobacco, these are things that are often given as offerings. Wine, even, different kinds of incense. The other consideration may be, of course, that you're not old enough to purchase and consume alcohol, or that you're not allowed to have it in the place where you're dwelling. And so you might have to have something else, even if a spirit would be very happy with alcohol and says that that's what they would like. So you might have to negotiate what kind of substitution could be used. And really the last tip or trick that I have is to practice. And that is so obvious that it almost is embarrassing to say, but at the same time, I know a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people over the years that I've been teaching and doing the work myself as a student on my own, who are like, oh, I don't get any results, I can't hear anything, I can't see anything, I'm just not getting anything from these spirits. But they're trying, you know, maybe once every 3 months, if that. It's like any kind of skill. You have to develop it. You have to flex and stretch those muscles in order to be able to use them with any kind of force or accuracy or agility. And then along with that, flex, stretch, and then rest. You know, don't just plug away at it all the time, because that can be counterproductive too. You know, give yourself some kind of time to decompress and to not do it, to not be constantly in communication with spirit or trying to be in communication with spirit, especially if this is something that you're just working on, so that you have an ebb and flow to it as well. Okay, so that was a lot of thought. I hope that it was helpful. Let me know what you think. Drop comments about any tips or tricks or techniques that you're using, because that'll be helpful for me to get thoughts on as well, and also for other people that are looking at the channel, um, who are looking for inspiration or insight. So I will see you guys back here next Monday at noon. Bye, friends.